The wind howling across the rooftop of the nondescript office building felt colder than it should have for a spring afternoon. It tugged mercilessly at Izuku Midoriya's middle school uniform, whipping his unruly green hair around his wide, moisture-filled eyes. Just moments ago, he had been clinging to the leg of his idol, the symbol of peace, soaring through the sky with his heart hammering against his ribs in sheer exhilaration. Now, the adrenaline had completely evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, agonizing void in his chest. Before him stood All Might, but not the All Might from the posters. This man was gaunt, skeletal, his clothes hanging off an angular, emaciated frame. The golden aura of invincibility had dissolved in a cloud of steam, revealing a broken, bleeding man who looked more like a specter than a savior. Pro-heroes are always having to risk their lives, the skeletal man said, his voice stripped of its booming, theatrical bravado. It was quiet, raspy, and terribly grounded in reality. Some villains just can't be beaten without powers. So no, I honestly don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. The words didn't strike Izuku like a physical blow. They didn't feel like a punch or a kick from Bakugo. Instead, they felt like a scalpel. They were clean, precise, and severed the main artery of his life's dream in a single, surgical stroke. If you want to help people, there are plenty of other ways to do it, All Might continued, turning his back toward the roof access door. You can become a police officer. They get mocked because villains are always delivered to their doorstep, but it is a fine, honorable profession. Izuku couldn't speak. His throat felt as though it had been packed with dry sand. He wanted to scream, to beg, to present his carefully curated notebooks filled with thousands of hours of heroic analysis to prove that his mind was a weapon, even if his body was a blank slate. But his voice had died somewhere deep in his lungs. It's not bad to dream, young man, All Might said softly, pausing at the threshold of the stairwell. He didn't look back. But you also have to consider what's realistic. The heavy metal door clicked shut. The latch echoed across the empty rooftop with a terrible, ringing finality. Izuku stood frozen for what felt like hours, though it was likely only a few minutes. The city of Muzurifu continued to hum around him, oblivious to the fact that his universe had just collapsed. Sirens wailed in the distance. The muffled sounds of traffic drifted up from the streets below. The world was moving on. Slowly, as if his limbs were submerged in wet cement, Izuku dropped to his knees. His yellow backpack slid off his shoulder, landing with a soft, pathetic thud against the gravel. He reached out with trembling, soot-stained fingers and pulled out the charred remains of his Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. Bakugo had blown it up and thrown it out the window earlier that day. It felt like a lifetime ago. He stared at the scorched, soggy cover. Consider what's realistic. A single tear broke free, carving a clean line through the dirt on his cheek. It fell, splashing against the blackened notebook. Then came another. And another. Soon, Izuku was weeping openly, clutching the ruined book to his chest, his shoulders heaving with silent, gasping sobs. He had spent his entire 14 years of life waiting for a miracle, praying to whatever cosmic force governed the genetic lottery that his extra toe joint was a mistake, a late-blooming anomaly. But there were no miracles. There was only biology. And biology had deemed him a spectator. By the time Izuku forced himself to leave the rooftop, the sun had begun its descent, casting the city in bruised shades of violet and deep, bleeding orange. He didn't take his usual route home. His usual route took him down the main thoroughfares, past the giant electronic billboards showcasing the latest hero rankings, past the agency offices where brightly costumed sidekicks waved to adoring fans. He couldn't stomach the sight of them right now. The vibrant, colorful world of heroes suddenly felt blindingly abrasive. Instead, he drifted through the back streets and narrow alleyways of the commercial district, his head bowed, his red sneakers scuffing against the pavement. He felt like a ghost haunting his own life. I should start looking into high schools with good general education tracks, he thought numbly, his analytical mind trying to process the trauma by organizing it into a practical plan. Maybe I can get a job at the police precinct as a dispatcher. Or maybe I could just work in an office. A normal, invisible life. He turned down a narrow, shadowed alleyway sandwiched between a towering bank and an abandoned, windowless warehouse. The air here was cooler, smelling faintly of damp cardboard and discarded takeout. Stay back. I swear to God, I'll crack the casing. The voice, frantic and shrill, snapped Izuku out of his depressive stupor. He froze, pressing his back against the cold brick wall of the bank, his heart instinctively kicking into a higher gear. He peeked around a rusted dumpster. About 20 yards down the alley, a scene was unfolding that made his blood run cold. A man in a ragged, dark trench coat was backed against the chain-link fence. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and darting around like a cornered rat. In his right hand he held a cylindrical device about the size of a 2-liter soda bottle. The device was terrifying to look at. It was made of dull, reinforced gunmetal, but its center was completely transparent, revealing a thick, sloshing core of glowing, neon-green liquid. The liquid wasn't just glowing, it was pulsing. With every throb, a sickly, high-pitched whine emanated from the cylinder, sounding like a dentist's drill mixed with television static. The air around the object seemed to warp and shimmer, distorting the brick walls behind it. I told you to drop it, Otakawa. A deep, commanding voice echoed from above. Izuku looked up. Crouched gracefully on a fire escape 2 stories up was the rising rookie hero, Kamui Woods. His wooden armor creaked slightly as he shifted his weight, his arm already transforming into a mass of thick, intertwined branches, ready to strike. I stole this fair and square from the Vanguard Labs. The villain, Otakawa, shrieked, his finger hovering dangerously close to a large, manual release valve on the top of the cylinder. Do you have any idea what this is, Wood Boy? It's a gamma core. Unregulated, highly unstable, weaponized radiation. The doctor was going to use this to synthesize quirk enhancements. If I open this valve, the radiation spike will melt the flesh off everyone in a 3-block radius. Izuku's breath hitched. Gamma radiation? Weaponized? His analytical brain immediately went to work, despite his terror. Gamma rays possess the smallest wavelengths and the most energy of any wave in the electromagnetic spectrum. If that casing was breached, it wouldn't just be an explosion of heat. It would be an instantaneous, lethal dose of ionizing radiation that would tear through human DNA like a shotgun blast through tissue paper. Don't be a fool, Kamui Woods warned, his voice tightening. You open that, and you die too. I'm dead anyway if the League finds out I intercepted their delivery. Otakawa screamed, sheer panic making his hand tremble. It was then that Izuku saw him. Huddled behind a stack of wooden pallets, mere feet away from the manic villain, was a young boy. He couldn't have been older than 7 or 8. He was clutching a deflated soccer ball, his eyes wide with a terror so profound he couldn't even cry. He had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The villain hadn't noticed the boy. Kamui Woods, positioned above and behind the villain, couldn't see the boy obscured by the pallets. Izuku's mind raced. Kamui Woods is an ambush hero. He relies on binding his opponents quickly. If he uses his preemptive binding illusion, lacquered chain prison, the branches will shoot out at high speed. If the villain panics and drops the core, or if Kamui Woods strikes the cylinder, the casing will rupture. Kamui Woods doesn't know the boy is there. If the core breaches, the kid is ground zero. Izuku remembered All Might's words. You have to consider what's realistic. Realistically, Izuku Midoriya was a quirkless, frail, 14-year-old boy. Realistically, he should turn around, run as fast as his legs could carry him, and leave this to the professionals. Realistically, he was powerless. But as Izuku looked at the terrified eyes of the little boy, his body stopped listening to reality. Before his conscious mind could even formulate a plan, before he could weigh the pros and cons, before he could calculate the odds of survival, his legs exploded into motion. His yellow backpack slapped against his spine as he sprinted out from behind the dumpster, his red shoes pounding a frantic staccato rhythm against the asphalt. Hey! Kamui Woods yelled from above, noticing the blur of a middle school uniform rushing into the kill zone. Kid, get out of there! It's a hostage situation. Otakawa whipped his head around, his crazed eyes locking onto Izuku. Stay back. I'll do it. I swear I'll do it. Izuku didn't slow down. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have a strategy. He only had one objective: get the kid out of the blast radius. Lacquered chain prison. Kamui Woods roared, realizing he had lost control of the situation. He threw his arm forward, and a massive torrent of thick, brown timber erupted from his wrist, shooting down toward the alley floor like a dozen striking vipers. Otakawa shrieked in terror. He didn't intentionally open the valve. In his panic, as the wooden branches lashed around his torso and arms, his hand convulsed. The heavy metal cylinder slipped from his grasp. Time seemed to dilate for Izuku. He saw the heavy, glowing cylinder tumbling through the air in agonizing slow motion. He saw a thick branch of Kamuyu's wood whipping through the space exactly where the cylinder was falling. He saw the inevitable collision. Izuku dove. He slid across the rough, debris-covered asphalt, tearing the fabric of his trousers and scraping his knees raw. He slammed into the wooden pallets, crashing right into the little boy. With a desperate heave, Izuku wrapped his arms around the child and violently hurled him backward, out of the narrow confines of the alley and into the open street beyond. Above Izuku, a loud, metallic crack echoed through the alley. Kamuyu's binding wood had struck the glass center of the gammacore. Izuku rolled onto his back and looked up. The thick, transparent casing spiderwebbed with a million tiny fractures. The sickly, neon-green liquid inside seemed to freeze, condensing into a single, blinding point of absolute light. I'm going to die, Izuku realized. Strangely, he didn't feel afraid. He just felt sad that his mother would have to receive the phone call. The cylinder shattered. There was no sound. No boom, no roar of flames, no concussive shockwave throwing him against the wall. Instead, there was a flash of green light so intensely brilliant that it seemed to erase the concept of shadows entirely. The world vanished, replaced by an ocean of pure, vibrating emerald energy. Then came the heat. It didn't burn his skin like fire. It bypassed his epidermis entirely, penetrating straight through his muscles, his organs, and plunging deep into the very marrow of his bones. It was a cold, searing agony, a sensation of his body being simultaneously frozen and boiled from the inside out. Izuku opened his mouth to scream, but the air in his lungs had turned to plasma. He could feel something fundamentally breaking inside of him. It felt like billions of tiny, invisible scissors were snipping apart the double helixes of his DNA, unraveling the very blueprint of his humanity. The green light surged, forcing its way into his cellular structure. But instead of incinerating him, instead of turning his cells into necrotic mush, the unstable, quark-synthesized radiation reacted to something deep within Izuku. Perhaps it was his latent, dormant quirk factor. Perhaps it was the sheer, unyielding willpower of a boy who refused to die without saving someone. Whatever the catalyst, the radiation didn't destroy. It rewrote. Outside the alley, the world was in chaos. Kamui Woods had managed to throw up a thick shield of timber over himself, but the strange, silent pulse of green energy had blasted through the alleyway like a localized solar flare. Street lamps shattered. Car alarms a block away began to blare. The air tasted sharply of ozone and burning copper. Several police cruisers screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley, their sirens adding to the cacophony. Officers spilled out, drawing their sidearms, coughing as a thick, swirling cloud of dense, glowing green smoke began to billow out from the space between the buildings. The little boy Izuku had thrown to safety was sitting on the curb, crying hysterically, completely unharmed. Kamui Woods dropped down from the fire escape, his wooden shield smoking and charred black. He coughed, waving a hand to clear the toxic-smelling smog. The villain, Otakawa, lay unconscious on the ground, his clothes completely burned away, though he was miraculously still breathing, likely shielded by Kamui's wood. But where was the middle schooler? Kid! Kamui yelled, his voice strained. Kid, are you in there? Can you hear me? From deep within the swirling emerald fog, there was a sound. It wasn't the groan of an injured boy. It was a wet, heavy, sickening sound of tearing fabric and shifting mass. Crack. Pop. It sounded like a massive boulder being ground against bedrock, mixed with the wet tearing of thick leather. The police officers at the mouth of the alley raised their flashlights, their beams cutting through the green haze. Step out with your hands up. A police captain ordered, his hands trembling as he aimed his revolver. Deep within the fog, Izuku Midoriya was experiencing a living nightmare. The pain hadn't stopped, it had evolved. He felt his skeleton expanding, his bones lengthening and thickening at a terrifying, explosive rate. His school uniform, once slightly too large for him, shredded into confetti as a sudden, massive surge of muscle mass erupted across his torso, arms, and legs. He fell forward, planting his hands on the asphalt to catch himself, but the asphalt crunched and cratered beneath his palms. He stared down at his hands, his vision swimming in a strange, heightened state of clarity. Colors seemed sharper, movements more defined. His hands, they weren't human anymore. They were massive, easily the size of manhole covers. The soft, pale skin of a 14-year-old boy was gone. In its place was a thick, overlapping hide of dark, deep-sea blue. It looked like the armor plating of a battleship, yet it flexed and moved with the fluidity of muscle. Thick, jagged claws, black as obsidian, extended from his broad, blocky fingertips. He touched his face. His delicate features had warped into a heavy, jutting brow. His jaw had widened, extending forward into an underbite filled with massive, flat teeth designed for crushing. He could feel thick, armored ridges running over his skull and down the back of his neck, interlocking like the scales of a prehistoric beast. He tried to stand up. As he pushed off the ground, he realized his center of gravity had drastically shifted. He didn't just stand, he towered. The chain-link fence that had once loomed over him now barely reached his waist. He was massive. He had to be over 3 meters tall, perhaps nearly 4, and built like a walking tank. I said, "Step out into the light." The police captain barked from the end of the alley. Izuku panicked. "I need to tell them I'm okay. I need to tell them it's me. What is happening to me? Did the radiation give me a quirk? Did it mutate me? This isn't right. This is a villain's quirk." He stepped forward, out of the dissipating green smoke, into the harsh glare of the police flashlights and the street lamps. The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps of pure, unadulterated horror rippled through the gathered officers. Several of them stumbled backward, their guns shaking uncontrollably. Kamui Woods tightened his stance, extending his wooden tendrils, his eyes wide behind his wooden mask. What is that thing?" A young officer stammered. "It's a monster," another whispered. "The radiation. It must have summoned a villain." Izuku looked at them, his glowing, golden eyes wide with confusion and plea. He raised his massive, blue, armored hands in a gesture of surrender. "Wait," Izuku tried to say. "It's me. The middle schooler. Please, I need help." But that wasn't what came out. His vocal cords had thickened to the size of steel cables. His larynx was a hollow cavern. When he spoke, the sound that erupted from his maw was a deep, guttural, earth-shaking rumble. It was a voice that vibrated in the chests of everyone present, a sound like tectonic plates grinding together. Wait. It's me. To the police, it didn't sound like Japanese. It sounded like the monstrous, demonic growl of a beast preparing to strike. "It's hostile. Fire!" the captain roared. Bang! 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 3 gunshots rang out. Izuku flinched, instinctively throwing his arms up to protect his face. He braced for the searing pain of bullets tearing into his flesh. The bullets struck his forearms. Ping! 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 They flattened against his thick, blue, armored hide like spitballs against a brick wall, dropping harmlessly to the asphalt. Izuku slowly lowered his arms, staring at the flattened slugs on the ground. He didn't even feel a sting. His skin was impenetrable. "Guns don't work," Kamui Wood shouted, leaping onto the wall of the alley to gain the high ground. "Fall back. I'll restrain the beast." Lacquered chain, beast. The word echoed in Izuku's mind, drowning out the sirens, the shouting, and the gunfire. They thought he was a monster. They were going to fight him. If Kamui Woods attacked him, and he accidentally fought back with this new, terrifying strength, he could kill a pro-hero. He could become a villain. Complete, primal panic seized Izuku Midoriya's brilliant mind. His heartbeat, already hammering, accelerated to a frantic, pounding rhythm that he could hear echoing in his own cavernous chest. Adrenaline flooded his drastically altered system. A strange, instinctual biological trigger flipped in his brain. He didn't think about his next move. His mutated body simply acted. Izuku turned away from the police. He looked down the opposite end of the alleyway, toward a large brick wall that sealed it off. He crouched low, his massive, piston-like legs bunching tightly beneath his armored frame. The asphalt beneath his clawed toes groaned and shattered under the immense pressure. He needed to escape. He needed to hide. Izuku leaped. The sheer concussive force of his jump generated a shockwave that blew out the remaining windows in the alleyway and sent the heavy metal dumpster flipping end over end down the street. To Kamui Woods and the police below, the blue behemoth simply vanished. 1 second he was there, an insurmountable wall of armored muscle, and the next, he was a blurry blue streak rocketing straight up into the night sky, moving with a velocity that defied all laws of physics and aerodynamics. Izuku burst over the roof of the 5-story bank in a fraction of a second. The wind roared in his ears, tearing at his armored skin. He was flying. No, he was falling upward at a terrifying speed. He ascended higher and higher, clearing the skyline of the commercial district, until the city of Muzutafa looked like a glowing grid of tiny, insignificant lights below him. The sheer terror of the ascent snapped him out of his primal panic. I jumped over a building. I'm hundreds of feet in the air. Oh God, gravity. What goes up must come down. The apex of his jump hit, and the agonizingly long descent began. The wind shifted, rushing up against him now. Izuku flailed his massive blue arms, desperately trying to orient himself. His analytical mind, suppressed by the panic of the mutation, fought its way back to the surface. Trajectory. I'm falling in a parabolic arc. At this speed, given my mass, which has to be at least 1,000 pounds, an impact in a populated area will crater a city street. I'll kill people. I need to aim. I need to find somewhere empty. He twisted his heavy torso, scanning the city below. To his left were residential districts. To his right, the dense commercial sector. But ahead of him, bordering the edge of the city where the land met the ocean, was a massive, dark stain on the coastline. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. For years, ocean currents had deposited illegal dumping and trash onto the beach, turning it into a mountainous, rusted wasteland of broken refrigerators, crushed cars, and towering piles of scrap metal. It was abandoned. It was isolated. It was perfect. Izuku tucked his knees into his chest, attempting to streamline his massive body to adjust his trajectory. He didn't know how to fly, but he found that by shifting his immense weight, he could slightly alter his path of descent. The rusted mountains of Dagoba Beach rushed up to meet him at terminal velocity. Brace for impact. He threw his legs down and crossed his arms over his face. Kaboom! Izuku slammed into the center of the trash beach with the force of a meteor strike. A massive plume of sand, rusted metal, and shattered glass erupted into the night sky. The impact created a crater 20 feet deep and 50 feet wide, completely atomizing a towering pile of abandoned washing machines and violently displacing a rusted-out pickup truck, sending it spinning into the ocean waves. The shockwave rattled the windows of the few apartments bordering the beach, but otherwise, the night remained still. Deep within the smoking crater, beneath a layer of twisted steel and wet sand, there was movement. A massive, blue, armored hand thrust upward, easily pushing aside a jagged sheet of corrugated iron that weighed several hundred pounds. Izuku pulled his massive frame out of the wreckage. He stood up in the center of the crater, sand sliding off his smooth, impenetrable blue plating. He patted his chest, his arms, his face. I'm alive. I fell from, it had to be 1,000 feet. And I didn't even break a bone. I don't even have a scratch. He looked around at the devastation he had caused simply by landing. He looked at his hands again. The moonlight caught the sharp, deadly glint of his black claws. He traced the heavy, interlocking armor plates on his forearms. He walked slowly toward a relatively intact, discarded vanity mirror leaning against a pile of tires. He knelt down, his massive knees sinking deep into the sand, and peered into the cracked glass. The face staring back at him was the stuff of nightmares. It was a brutal, square-jawed monster. The deep, oceanic blue of the armor plating looked cold and unyielding. The eyes, lacking irises or pupils, glowed with a steady, eerie, golden light. There was no trace of the freckled, timid boy who had stood on the roof with All Might just a few hours ago. All Might had told him he couldn't be a hero. He had told him to be realistic. Izuku reached up with a trembling, massive claw, resting it against the cracked glass of the mirror, directly over the reflection of his monstrous face. He didn't have a quirk. He was quite certain of that. Quirks were natural. They manifested at age 4. They felt like an extension of the body. This was a mutation. This was the violent, chaotic result of illegal, unstable science tearing his DNA apart and reconstructing it into a living weapon. He was a freak. He was a monster. A blue, armored behemoth born from the villainous ambition of others. But as Izuku stared into those glowing golden eyes, he realized something else. Behind the terrifying armor, beneath the crushing muscle and the monstrous facade, his mind was entirely his own. He was still Izuku Midoriya. He still loved heroes. He still wanted to save people. He had just thrown a child out of the path of a bomb without a second thought. He squeezed his hand into a fist. The muscles in his massive forearm coiled like thick steel hawsers. The raw, terrifying power thrumming through his veins was intoxicating, terrifying, and utterly absolute. You can't be a hero without a quirk, All Might had said. Izuku looked down at the pulverized remains of the washing machines he had landed on. He didn't just have power now. He had the strength to rival the gods of his world. He had the durability to walk through gunfire. I'm not quirkless anymore, Izuku whispered. The guttural, booming voice that echoed off the mountains of trash still startled him, but he forced himself not to flinch. He closed his glowing golden eyes and focused. He didn't know how this body worked yet. He didn't know the rules of this new biology. But he knew that adrenaline and panic had triggered the transformation. He needed to calm down. He needed to find his center. He focused on the sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shore. He focused on the cool night breeze blowing off the water. He took a deep, slow, cavernous breath, regulating his massive heartbeat, forcing his pulse to slow from a frantic drumbeat to a steady, calm rhythm. Breathe in. Breathe out. A strange sensation washed over him. It wasn't painful like the initial transformation. It felt more like a violent shiver, a rapid deflation. The blue armor plating began to shift, losing its rigidity, melting back into flesh. His bones popped and compressed, his massive frame shrinking rapidly. Within 10 seconds, Izuku Midoriya was kneeling in the sand, gasping for air. He was back in his own body. His pale skin, his freckles, his small, unremarkable frame. He was completely naked. His middle school uniform had been destroyed in the initial expansion, and shivering violently in the cool ocean air. He looked at his normal, fragile hands. He could still feel the phantom sensation of the blue armor, the dormant, radioactive beast slumbering just beneath the surface of his skin, waiting for his heart rate to spike, waiting for the trigger. Izuku pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around his bare legs to keep warm. He sat alone in the center of the trash dump, the silence of the beach contrasting the roaring tempest inside his mind. He had lost his dream today. He had lost his idol. He had lost his humanity. But as the first light of dawn began to paint the horizon in pale shades of pink and gold, Izuku Midoriya picked up a jagged piece of rusted metal from the sand. He turned it over in his hands, feeling its sharp edge. He squeezed the metal tightly. They want a realistic hero? He thought, his green eyes hardening with a resolve he had never known before. Fine. I'll show them exactly what reality looks like. The beast was his now. And he was going to learn how to leash it. The first rays of dawn did not bring warmth to Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. They only illuminated the sheer scale of the desolation. Mountains of rusted washing machines, rotting tires, and the skeletal remains of forgotten automobiles cast long, jagged shadows across the sand. Izuku Midoriya sat shivering in the center of a crater of his own making, his pale arms wrapped tightly around his bare knees. The adrenaline had completely vacated his system, leaving behind a profound, hollow exhaustion that sank into his very marrow. His body felt alien to him. Every muscle ached with a dull, throbbing heat, as if he had just run a marathon while carrying a small car. His skin felt overly sensitive to the cool ocean breeze. His mind, usually a chaotic, rapid-fire engine of thoughts and calculations, was sluggish and thick. He looked down at his normal, fragile hands. The thick, deep-sea blue armor was gone. The obsidian claws were gone. He was just Izuku again. Quirkless, 14-year-old, defenseless Izuku. Except he wasn't quirkless anymore. Not really. I need to get home, he thought, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. Mom is going to be terrified. He stood up, his legs shaking like newborn fawns. He was completely naked. His middle school uniform had been shredded to atoms during the explosive expansion of his physical form. He couldn't exactly walk the streets of Mizudafa like this, even in the early hours of the morning. Izuku turned toward the towering piles of garbage. If there was one advantage to being in an illegal dumping ground, it was the sheer variety of discarded human detritus. He began to pick his way through the rusted metal and broken glass, careful not to cut his bare feet. It took him 20 minutes of shivering excavation, but he finally found a half-buried, plastic garbage bag filled with old, discarded clothing. He ripped it open. The smell of mildew and old mothballs wafted up, but Izuku didn't care. He pulled out a faded, oversized gray sweatshirt advertising a defunct American wrestling promotion, and a pair of baggy, dark blue sweatpants with a bleach stain on the left knee. He slipped them on. They swallowed his small frame, but they offered a rudimentary layer of warmth and, more importantly, decency. As he tightened the drawstring of the sweatpants, a sharp, sudden pain twisted in his abdomen. Izuku gasped, clutching his stomach and falling to his knees in the sand. It wasn't the pain of the mutation. It was a sharp, gnawing, acidic cramp. Hunger. It was a ravenous, violent hunger unlike anything he had ever experienced. It felt as though his stomach was attempting to digest his own spine. His vision swam with black spots for a terrifying moment. Of course, his analytical mind whispered, fighting through the haze of starvation. The law of conservation of mass. I didn't just grow larger. My body synthesized hundreds of pounds of hyperdense muscle and armor plating in a matter of seconds. The cellular energy required for that kind of spontaneous biological generation is astronomical. The gamma radiation must have acted as a catalyst, but my metabolism is in complete overdrive trying to stabilize the aftermath. He needed calories. Immediately, driven by a primal urge, Izuku stumbled out of the scrapyard and onto the quiet, empty streets of the residential district bordering the beach. He moved like a ghost, sticking to the shadows of the alleyways, his bare feet slapping softly against the cold pavement. Every step was an exercise in willpower. The smell of a distant bakery prepping for the morning rush made his mouth water so intensely it physically hurt. He managed to navigate the familiar route back to his apartment complex. The sky was now a soft, pearlescent blue. It was just past 5:30 in the morning. He crept up the exterior stairwell, wincing at every creak of the metal grate, and reached his front door. His hands trembled as he reached for the doorknob. He didn't have his keys. They had been lost along with his backpack and uniform in the alleyway. He placed his hand flat against the cheap metal door, preparing himself to knock and face his mother's tearful, frantic questioning. But as his hand pressed against the wood, he noticed something. There was a faint, residual warmth buzzing just beneath his skin. It was an echo of the gamma energy. As he leaned his weight against the door, his fingers reflexively tightened. With a sickening crunch, his fingertips sank directly into the solid wood and metal of the doorframe as if it were made of warm butter. Izuku yanked his hand back with a sharp gasp. He stared at the door. There were 4 perfectly round, deep indentations crushed into the wood and the metal strike plate. He hadn't transformed. He was in his normal, human body. But for a fraction of a second, his grip's strength had exerted hundreds of pounds of pressure without him even consciously trying. Residual strength, he noted, his heart skipping a beat. Even in my dormant state, my baseline biology has been fundamentally altered. My muscle fibers must be immensely denser. Taking a deep breath to steady his racing heart, Izuku reached out with absolute, surgical care. He gripped the doorknob with only his thumb and index finger, applying the absolute minimum amount of pressure. He turned it. The door was unlocked. Inko Midoriya was an anxious woman on the best of days. The fact that the door was unlocked meant she was likely pacing the living room, waiting for the police to call. Izuku slipped inside, closing the damaged door gently behind him. The apartment was dark, save for the flickering, muted light of the television in the living room. He peeked around the corner. His mother, Inko, was asleep on the sofa. Her face was buried in a clump of tissues, her eyes red and swollen even in sleep. Her phone was clutched tightly in her hand. On the television screen, a news anchor was speaking over a muted video feed. Izuku felt a massive wave of guilt crash over him. He had caused this. He had made her cry. He wanted to wake her, to hug her and tell her he was safe. But what could he say? Sorry I'm late, Mom. I got caught in an illegal radiation bomb and mutated into a 3-meter-tall blue monster, and now the police think I'm a villain. No. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not until he understood what was happening to him. If she knew the truth, she would try to take him to a doctor. A doctor would run a blood test. They would find the gamma radiation. They would report it to the Hero Public Safety Commission. Izuku would be quarantined, dissected, or locked away in Tartarus as an unregulated bioweapon. He needed to hide this. He needed to master it. Moving with agonizing slowness, Izuku crept past the living room and into the kitchen. His monstrous hunger returned with a vengeance. He opened the refrigerator, wincing at the bright light, and began to devour everything he could get his hands on without cooking. He ate half a loaf of bread, an entire package of sliced ham, 3 apples, 2 bananas, a bowl of leftover cold rice, and drank straight from a carton of milk. It wasn't enough to make him feel full, but it silenced the painful cramping in his stomach. Slightly revitalized, he tiptoed into his bedroom and softly clicked the door shut. His room was a shrine to heroics. Posters of All Might in his Silver Age, Bronze Age, and Golden Age costumes plastered the walls. Action figures lined his desk. Usually, this room was his sanctuary, his safe haven. Today, looking at the smiling face of the symbol of peace felt like looking at a stranger. I honestly don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. You also have to consider what's realistic. Izuku walked over to his desk. He reached out and gently laid his favorite All Might action figure face down. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of resignation. The fantasy was over. He sat down in his desk chair, opened his bottom drawer, and pulled out a fresh, unblemished notebook. It was supposed to be Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 14. He picked up a black pen. He stared at the blank cover for a long moment. Then, with a steady hand, he crossed out the words Hero Analysis for the Future. Beneath it he wrote, Project A-Bomb. Personal Mutation Analysis. Log 001. He didn't know why the name A-Bomb popped into his head. Perhaps it was a dark joke about his origins, born from an alleyway bomb. Perhaps it was the apocalyptic nature of his new form. But it felt right. It felt appropriately destructive. Izuku opened the notebook and began to write. The pen flew across the page as his analytical mind finally had an outlet for the trauma of the last 12 hours. Subject, Izuku Midoriya. Age 14. Quirk, none, confirmed via previous medical records. Current status, afflicted with unregulated cellular mutation via weaponized gamma-core radiation. Observations of the altered state, designation, A-bomb form. 1. Physical expansion, estimated height, 3.5 meters. Estimated weight, 500 to 600 kilograms. Biological mass synthesized instantaneously. Mechanism unknown. Suspect gamma radiation acts as a localized reality warping energy, or rapidly accelerates cellular mitosis using ambient energy. 2. Armor plating. Epidermis hardens into deep-sea blue, interlocking plates. Highly resistant to kinetic impact, deflected small arms fire from police without registering pain. Plates resemble a crustacean's exoskeleton but retain mammalian flexibility. 3. Strength output, exponentially increased. Shattered asphalt via jumping. Displaced tons of scrap metal upon impact. Limits currently untested. 4. Voice modulation, larynx thickens. Vocalizations become low frequency, high decibel. Communication with normal humans highly difficult. Will likely be perceived as a threat/beast. Izuku paused, tapping the pen against his chin. He needed to understand the trigger. Hypothesis on trigger mechanism. Transformation was not conscious. It occurred in a state of mortal panic, fear of being shot/attacked by Kamui Woods. Heart rate was highly elevated. Adrenaline levels peaked. The mutation seems intrinsically tied to the sympathetic nervous system's fight-or-flight response. To control the beast, I must control my pulse. I must master my fear. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. He needed data. He needed to test these hypotheses. He needed a laboratory where he could unleash a 3-meter-tall blue monster without attracting the attention of every pro-hero in Muzurifu. He looked out his window, toward the distant ocean, Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. It was isolated, filled with heavy objects, and universally ignored by the public. It was the perfect proving ground, but before he could plan his training regimen, a sudden, urgent voice from the television in the living room caught his attention. He cracked his bedroom door open to listen. A terrifying scene in the Tatooine shopping district yesterday afternoon, the news anchor reported. A villain composed entirely of volatile sludge took a middle school student hostage, utilizing the boy's explosive quirk to hold pro-heroes at bay. Izuku froze. Tatooine shopping district? Explosive quirk? He crept out of his room and looked at the television over his sleeping mother's head. Helicopter footage showed a raging fire consuming a narrow city street. In the center of the inferno was a massive, horrific monster made of green, bubbling sludge. And trapped within the sludge, struggling furiously, his face contorted in agony and rage, was Katsuki Bakugo. Kaken! Izuku whispered, his eyes wide. Several pro-heroes, including Death Arms and Empty Lady, were unable to intervene due to the narrow confines and the hostage's volatile explosions. The anchor continued. However, tragedy was averted when the number one hero, All Might, arrived on the scene, dispersing the villain with a single, devastating punch that actually changed the weather. The footage cut to All Might in his buff, heroic form, standing victorious as rain fell around him. Izuku stared at the screen, a complex knot of emotions twisting in his chest. If All Might hadn't crushed his dreams on that roof, if Izuku had walked his normal route home, he would have been there. He would have seen Kaken suffocating. What would I have done? Izuku asked himself. I would have run in, his mind answered instantly. Even quirkless. I would have tried to save him. It's what I did in the alleyway with the gamma bomb, but he hadn't been there. Because he had taken a detour, he had saved a little boy in an alleyway, and in return, he had been turned into a monster. In other news, the anchor's tone shifted from triumphant to gravely serious. The footage on the screen changed from All Might to a shaky, dark cell phone video recorded from a high apartment window. Authorities are still searching for the mysterious, unidentified creature that attacked pro-hero Kamui Woods and several police officers in the commercial district last night. The video played. It was grainy, shot from a distance, but the image was unmistakable. Standing in the harsh glare of police flashlights, surrounded by swirling, toxic green smoke, was a towering, heavily armored, blue behemoth. The creature looked like a demon pulled straight from a nightmare. The video caught the exact moment the police opened fire. The bullets sparked harmlessly off the creature's thick hide. Then, with a terrifying, primal roar, the beast crouched and launched itself into the sky, vanishing into the night like a ballistic missile. Police suspect the creature is a high-level heteromorphic villain, or perhaps an unregulated biological weapon related to the illegal technology recovered at the scene, the anchor warned. Citizens are advised to stay indoors and report any sightings of the blue behemoth immediately. Do not engage. The creature is considered highly dangerous and heavily armored. Izuku stared at his own monstrous face on the television screen. Highly dangerous. Unregulated biological weapon. The media didn't see a boy who had just thrown himself on a bomb to save a child. They saw a monster. They saw a villain. Izuku backed away from the television, retreating into his bedroom. He closed the door and leaned against it, his breathing growing shallow. He was a fugitive. If anyone found out he was the blue behemoth, his life was over. He would never go to a normal high school. He would never get a normal job. He would be hunted. But as he looked down at his new notebook, at the words Project A-Bomb, a different thought pierced through his panic. It was a sharp, crystalline thought, forged in the fires of his lifelong obsession with heroes. Heroes aren't defined by how they look, he thought. Gang Orca looks like a villain. Ectoplasm looks terrifying. Hound Dog is literally a beast. They are heroes because they use their power to protect the innocent. He had power now. Terrifying, monstrous power. But he was still Izuku. He walked back to his desk and picked up a pamphlet he had hidden under a stack of papers. It was the application guide for UA High School's hero course. The entrance exam was in exactly 10 months. 10 months to figure out how to trigger the transformation at will. 10 months to learn how to control a body that weighed half a ton. 10 months to figure out how to fight not like a mindless beast, but like a hero. He didn't need to be realistic anymore. He just needed to be unbreakable. 2 days later, Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the rusted wasteland of the beach. The air smelled strongly of oxidized iron, rotting kelp, and salt. Izuku stood at the edge of the water, dressed in his oversized gray sweatshirt and sweatpants. He had spent the last 2 days carefully avoiding his mother's worried gazes, eating massive amounts of food in secret to satiate his mutated metabolism, and analyzing his own biology. Now, it was time for field testing. He set his notebook down on a relatively clean, overturned bucket, placed a stopwatch next to it, and took a deep breath. Objective 1. Controlled transformation. If he was going to take the year exam, he couldn't rely on being attacked by villains to trigger his power. He needed to be able to summon the A-bomb form on command. His hypothesis was that the transformation was linked to his heart rate and adrenaline production. He began to run. He sprinted across the loose sand, his bare feet sinking deep with every step. He pushed himself as hard as he could, his lungs burning, his legs pumping furiously. He ran from one end of the massive trash dump to the other, doing burpees, jumping jacks, and high knees until he was drenched in sweat. He stopped, placing 2 fingers against his neck. His pulse was hammering. 140 beats per minute. He closed his eyes, focusing inward. He tried to mentally reach for the gamma energy, to find that dormant spark he had felt in the alleyway. He visualized the blue armor. He imagined the feeling of expansion. Nothing happened. He was just a sweaty, exhausted teenager standing on a beach. Damn it, Izuku panted, wiping his forehead. Elevated heart rate isn't enough. It's not just aerobic exercise. It's the endocrine system. It requires genuine adrenaline. It requires fear or rage. How was he supposed to artificially induce a fight or flight response? Izuku looked around the scrapyard. His eyes settled on a massive, rusted shipping container teetering precariously on top of a pile of crushed cars. It was at least 30 feet in the air, held up by nothing but rust and gravity. An incredibly reckless, stupid idea formed in his highly analytical brain. If I genuinely believe my life is in danger, the survival instinct will take over. Izuku walked over to the base of the precarious pile. He took a deep breath, steeling his nerves. He looked up at the tons of steel swaying slightly in the ocean breeze above him. He picked up a heavy iron pipe from the sand. He reared back, and with all his baseline, gamma-enhanced strength, he swung the pipe like a baseball bat, smashing it directly into the rusted support beam of the lowest car in the pile. Crunch! The support beam gave way with a screech of tearing metal. Izuku dropped the pipe and looked up. The entire tower of junk groaned. The shipping containers shifted, the center of gravity tipping past the point of no return. Tons of jagged, rusted steel began to freefall directly toward his head. Genuine, unadulterated terror spiked through Izuku's veins like a shot of liquid nitrogen. His pupils dilated. His heart didn't just beat, it seized, pumping a massive, overwhelming surge of adrenaline directly into his bloodstream. It's working! His mind screamed, right before the shadow of the shipping container eclipsed the sun. The gamma energy ignited. It was exactly like the alleyway. A blinding flash of pure, vibrating emerald light erupted from his pores. The searing, agonizing heat flashed through his bones. His oversized sweatshirt ripped down the seams as massive, corded muscles violently expanded across his back and shoulders. The physical pain of the expansion was quickly drowned out by the sensory overload of his changing perspective. The ground dropped away as he shot upward, growing a full 1.5 meters in less than 2 seconds. Deep-sea blue, interlocking armor plates materialized over his rapidly expanding flesh, fusing seamlessly with his musculature. His jaw jutted forward, his teeth flattening into crushing plates. The shipping container crashed down upon him. To a normal human, it would have been instantly fatal. A gruesome pancaking of flesh and bone. To the newly manifested blue behemoth, it felt like someone had dropped a heavy cardboard box on his shoulders. Izuku raised his massive, clawed hands. He caught the underside of the rusted shipping container. The metal groaned and buckled around his thick fingers. With a deep, guttural roar that shook the sand beneath his feet, Izuku flexed his immense, armored shoulders and violently hurled the entire container forward. The 20-foot steel box flew through the air as if it were made of styrofoam, crashing into a pile of refrigerators 50 yards away with a deafening, earth-shaking boom. Silence returned to the beach, save for the settling of dust and the crash of the ocean waves. Izuku stood amidst the wreckage, his golden, pupilless eyes wide. His chest heaved, drawing in massive amounts of oxygen. He looked down at his blue, armored hands. He flexed his obsidian claws. It worked. His voice was a terrifying, rumbling bass. He could feel the vibrations of his own words rattling in his ribcage. He had done it. He had successfully triggered the transformation. But he couldn't drop shipping containers on himself during the UA entrance exam. He needed to find a way to anchor this feeling, to memorize the precise biological and emotional frequency of the adrenaline spike so he could summon it without actual mortal peril. But for now, he was A-bomb. And he had a laboratory to use. Izuku walked over to an abandoned, rusted-out four-door sedan. He squatted down, grabbing the front bumper with one hand and the rear bumper with the other. Objective 2, Strength Output Parameters. He lifted. He expected resistance. He expected to feel his muscles strain, his joints pop. Instead, the car rose off the ground with the ease of lifting a tightly packed suitcase. Izuku hoisted the 2-ton vehicle over his head. He didn't even feel off balance. His massive, 3-meter frame provided a flawless center of gravity. He tossed the car into the air, caught it, and then crushed the roof inward with a single squeeze of his hands, folding the vehicle in half like a piece of origami. Fascinating, Izuku rumbled, his terrifying voice contrasting sharply with his deeply nerdy internal monologue. Muscle density must be at least 40 times that of a baseline human. The leverage provided by the elongated bone structure maximizes torque. Let's test striking power. He walked over to an abandoned, industrial iron boiler. It was thick, solid, and incredibly heavy. Izuku planted his feet. He analyzed the structure of the boiler, looking for the optimal strike point. He didn't pull his arm back for a wild, brawling haymaker. Instead, he dropped into a textbook martial arts stance he had watched the pro hero Fourth Kind use on television. He twisted his hips, utilizing his entire massive body weight, and fired a straight, perfectly aligned punch directly into the center of the boiler. Kong! The sound was deafening, like a massive church bell being struck by a cannonball. Izuku's fist didn't just dent the iron, it punched a perfect, jagged hole straight through the thick metal, bursting out the other side. He pulled his arm out and inspected his knuckles. The blue armor plating wasn't even scratched. There was no pain. No fractured metacarpals. Durability, extreme, he noted out loud. The armor plates act as both a kinetic dampener and a piercing deterrent. I wonder. He found a jagged, incredibly sharp piece of rusted sheet metal. He gripped it with his left hand and pressed the razor-sharp edge against the inside of his right forearm. Right where the armor plating was slightly thinner, he dragged the metal across his skin, applying significant pressure. The metal screeched, sparking slightly as it ground against his blue hide. It left a faint, chalky white scratch, but it didn't penetrate. No blood. No cut. I am a living tank, Izuku realized, a profound sense of awe washing over him. With this strength and durability, I can save anyone from a collapsing building. I can shield civilians from explosions. I can be a wall that villains can't break. He spent the next 3 hours utterly destroying the scrapyard. He treated the mountains of trash as his own personal gym and physics laboratory. He threw engine blocks to test his throwing accuracy. He practiced his jumping, learning exactly how much pressure to apply to his legs to control his trajectory and landing. He realized that if he landed flat-footed, he caused a shockwave. But if he landed on the balls of his massive feet and bent his knees, his muscles absorbed the kinetic energy, allowing for surprisingly quiet landings for a beast of his size. By late afternoon, he was exhausted. Not just physically, but mentally. Piloting the massive A-bomb body required immense focus. The gamma energy humming in his veins was a volatile fuel. Whenever he exerted maximum effort, he could feel a creeping, primal rage trying to edge into his conscious thoughts, a desire to simply smash and destroy without calculation. He had to actively suppress it, relying on his analytical mind to keep the beast leashed. He sat down on the sand, looking out at the ocean. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden rays across the water. Time to revert, he told himself. He closed his glowing golden eyes. He began his breathing exercises. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds. He focused on the rhythm of the waves. He pictured the gentle, smiling face of his mother. He mentally walked through the layout of his favorite hero notebook. Slowly, the adrenaline faded. His heart rate dropped. The violent shiver overtook him. The armor plates dissolved, his muscles compressed, and within moments, the massive blue behemoth was gone. Izuku Midoriya, wearing shredded sweatpants and shivering from the sudden loss of mass, fell backward onto the sand, gasping for air. He lay there for a long time, watching the clouds drift by. "Okay," Izuku whispered, his normal voice sounding incredibly small and fragile after hours of roaring. "Strength, durability, mobility. It's a complete physical enhancement package. But it's too noticeable. If I try to do stealth operations, or if I need to avoid detection before engaging a villain, my size and color make me a giant target." He sat up, brushing the sand off his shredded clothes. He walked over to his overturned bucket and picked up his notebook and pen. He began to scribble down his findings, filling page after page with calculations, diagrams of his own altered muscle structure, and hypotheses on the structural integrity of his armor plates. As he was writing, the sound of a distant, humming motor caught his attention. Izuku looked up. Cruising slowly along the coastline, about 100 yards offshore, was a sleek, white police patrol boat. 2 officers were standing on the deck, scanning the shoreline with binoculars. Panic flared in Izuku's chest. "They're looking for the blue behemoth," he realized. "They know the creature escaped toward the coast. If they see me out here, surrounded by freshly crushed cars and craters, they'll put 2 and 2 together." There was nowhere to hide. The beach was relatively flat near the water, and the nearest pile of trash was 50 feet away. If he ran, they would see him. If he transformed to fight or flee, they would definitely see him and call in pro-heroes. He dropped his notebook. His heart rate skyrocketed instantly. The sheer terror of being discovered, of having his secret ripped away before he could even begin to control it, flooded his system. The gamma energy flared. Before he could even attempt to suppress it, the transformation overtook him. In a flash of green light, the 3-meter-tall blue monster was standing on the open beach, fully exposed to the setting sun. "No, no, no!" Izuku panicked, his massive voice rumbling like an earthquake. He looked out at the boat. The officers hadn't turned their binoculars toward him yet, but they were scanning left to right. It was only a matter of seconds. Izuku dropped to his hands and knees, pressing his massive, blue-armored body flat against the sand, trying to make himself as small as possible behind a half-buried, rusted car chassis. But it was useless. He was a giant, bright blue anomaly against the tan sand and brown rust. "Don't look at me," Izuku thought desperately, squeezing his golden eyes shut. "I need to disappear. I need to blend in. Please, just let me hide." His entire nervous system was screaming for concealment. The gamma energy, highly reactive to his emotional state, surged in response to his desperate plea. A strange, tingling sensation rippled across Izuku's skin. It didn't feel like the painful expansion of his muscles. It felt like a million tiny, cold droplets of water washing over his armor plates. On the police boat, Officer Tanaka lowered his binoculars and rubbed his eyes. "Hey, did you see a green flash over there by the dumping grounds a second ago?" His partner, Officer Sato, scoffed. "Probably just the sun reflecting off some broken glass. That whole beach is a hazard zone. Keep your eyes peeled for anything large and blue." Captain said the beast was massive. Tanaka raised his binoculars again, scanning the exact spot where Izuku was hiding behind the car chassis. Through the magnified lenses, Tanaka saw the rusted, brown frame of the car. He saw the golden, rippled sand behind it. He saw a few scattered gray rocks. "Nothing," Tanaka reported, panning his view further down the beach. "Just more garbage." On the beach, Izuku slowly opened his eyes. He waited for the shout. He waited for the siren. He waited for the gunshot. Nothing happened. The boat simply continued its slow cruise down the coastline, the hum of its motor fading into the distance. Izuku let out a massive, rattling sigh of relief. He slowly pushed himself up off the sand, looking down at his hands to check if he had somehow reverted to his human form without noticing. He froze. His hands were still massive. The thick, interlocking armor plates were still there. The sharp claws were still there, but they weren't blue. His hands were a mottled, granular pattern of tan, gold, and dark brown. They perfectly, flawlessly matched the texture and color of the wet sand beneath him. Izuku lifted his arm, staring in absolute, stunned disbelief. As he raised his arm against the backdrop of the rusted, orange car chassis, a wave of color shifted rapidly across his skin. Like a line of dominoes falling, the tan and gold pattern dissolved, replaced instantly by streaks of dark, oxidized orange, flaky brown rust, and shadows of deep gray. What? Izuku breathed, his jaw dropping. He stepped away from the car, moving toward a pile of green, rotting kelp. As he moved, the colors on his armor shifted continuously, washing over his body in fluid, rippling waves, constantly analyzing and mimicking his immediate background. He was practically invisible. If he stood perfectly still, even he had trouble discerning where his arm ended and the background began. His analytical brain practically exploded with excitement, completely overriding the lingering terror of the police boat. Chromatophores! He rumbled enthusiastically. The armor plating isn't just a kinetic shield. The cellular structure must be laced with hyper-advanced, gamma-radiated chromatophores, iridophores, and leucophores similar to a cuttlefish or an octopus, but it's reacting instantaneously to my visual cortex and subconscious desire for concealment. He was a 3-meter-tall walking tank, and he had active camouflage. This changed everything. He wasn't just a brawler. He wasn't just a brute force weapon destined to smash things. With this ability, he could infiltrate. He could ambush. He could protect people from the shadows without causing panic. He could be a hero who fought with his mind, using the beast as a tactical instrument. Izuku spent the next hour playing hide-and-seek with himself. He practiced leaning against different textures, metal, wood, sand, water, watching in fascination as his skin effortlessly mirrored the environment. He found that the camouflage was deeply tied to his concentration. If he got distracted, or if he moved too quickly, the illusion would waver, breaking the pattern and revealing flashes of his natural deep blue armor. It required absolute mental discipline to maintain the camouflage while moving. It was a mental workout that exhausted him even more than throwing shipping containers. As the sky darkened to a deep indigo, and the stars began to pinprick the heavens, Izuku finally allowed himself to revert. The camouflage faded into blue, and the blue melted back into pale, frail human skin. He lay in the sand, utterly spent, wearing only the shredded waistband of his sweatpants. He didn't even have the energy to shiver. He reached out and grabbed his notebook. He clicked his pen, ignoring the fact that his human hand was trembling violently from the biological toll of the day. Log 001. Update. Discovery of secondary ability. Active adaptive camouflage. The A-bomb form possesses the ability to manipulate the pigmentation and texture of its outer armor plating to seamlessly blend into its environment. Requires high mental concentration to maintain during locomotion. Conclusion of Day 1 testing. The A-bomb mutation is not a curse. It is a highly versatile, overpowering biological toolkit. However, it is fundamentally unstable. The emotional trigger, adrenaline/fear/rage, makes it dangerous to summon in crowded areas until I can refine the psychological anchor. Furthermore, the physical toll on my baseline human body post-reversion is severe. I require massive caloric intake and physical conditioning just to survive the aftermath of the transformation. Izuku closed the notebook. He looked out over the massive, sprawling mountain range of garbage that covered Dagobah Beach. 10 months. I can't just train the beast, Izuku whispered to the empty beach, his voice filled with a quiet, burning determination. If I want to control the monster, the cage has to be stronger. My human body has to be able to handle the strain. He looked at the UE pamphlet sticking out from beneath his notebook. I'm going to clean this beach, he declared. Not as A-bomb. As Izuku Midoriya. I'm going to build my human body up so it doesn't shatter when the beast takes over. And when the entrance exam comes, He smiled, a genuine, fierce smile that reached his eyes for the first time since he had met All Might on that roof. I'm going to smash it. The blue behemoth was a terrifying anomaly. A monster born of villainous science and tragic circumstance. But the mind controlling it was pure, unyielding hero. Izuku Midoriya stood up, grabbed his makeshift clothes, and began the long walk home. He had a lot of eating to do, and 10 months of hell to prepare for. The dawn of the UA entrance exam broke over Mizudafu with a crisp, electric chill. Standing on the retaining wall of Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, Izuku Midoriya took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the sharp, salty air of the ocean. Below him stretched a pristine expanse of golden sand, gently kissed by the rolling tide. The mountains of rusted washing machines, rotting tires, and crushed automobiles that had choked this coastline for over a decade were completely gone. In their place stood a testament to 10 months of unrelenting, agonizing, bone-breaking labor. Izuku didn't look like the frail, trembling boy who had stood on a rooftop with All Might nearly a year ago. The oversized gray sweatshirt he wore clung tightly to a newly forged physique. His shoulders were broad, his arms thick with dense, highly conditioned muscle. His hands, though still human, were heavily calloused and scarred from moving tons of jagged scrap metal. He hadn't cleaned the beach as A-bomb. That would have taken an hour. He had cleaned it as Izuku Midoriya. He had learned early on that the A-bomb mutation was a parasite of kinetic energy. When he transformed, the beast drew upon his baseline human physiology to anchor the monstrous, half-ton mass of blue armor and muscle. If his human body was weak, the transformation would leave him bedridden for days, his nervous system fried and his muscles trembling. But by pushing his human form to its absolute physical peak, the cage holding the beast had become ironclad. The post-transformation fatigue was now manageable, replaced instead by a ravenous, black hole metabolism that required him to eat nearly 6,000 calories a day just to maintain his equilibrium. Izuku reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a massive, foil-wrapped breakfast burrito, his fourth of the morning. He devoured it in 5 bites, feeling the dense carbohydrates hit his stomach and instantly convert to fuel. Today's the day, Izuku whispered, his green eyes reflecting the rising sun. He had spent the last 10 months mastering 2 entirely different lives. By day, he was a middle school student, studying fiercely to guarantee a perfect score on the UA-written exam. By night, deep within the isolated, cleared-out craters of the scrapyard, he was the blue behemoth. He had learned the exact physiological frequency required to trigger his transformation without needing a life-or-death scenario. He could artificially spike his adrenaline by utilizing specialized breathing techniques and intensely focusing his emotional state, recalling the sheer terror of the alleyway and the shipping container. He had mastered the active camouflage, learning to maintain the chromatophore illusion even while sprinting. He had mapped the exact limits of his strength and durability. He wasn't just a boy with a monster inside him anymore. He and the beast had reached an understanding. A symbiosis. Izuku slung his duffel bag over his shoulder and began the walk toward his destiny. UA High School was a fortress of glass, steel, and prestige. The main building loomed over the incoming hordes of middle school students like a modern colossus, its 4 massive towers gleaming in the morning light. Izuku stood at the front gates, staring up at the H-shaped structure. His heart thumped a steady, controlled rhythm in his chest. A year ago, he would have been hyperventilating at the mere sight of the campus. Today, he felt an eerie, serene calm. He knew exactly what he was capable of. Out of my way, Deku! The familiar, gravelly snarl cut through the ambient chatter of the crowd. Izuku didn't flinch. He slowly turned his head to see Katsuki Bakugo marching up the paved walkway, his red eyes burning with their usual volatile arrogance, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his uniform pants. Bakugo stopped a few feet away, expecting Izuku to cower, stutter, and scurry out of his path like he had done since they were 4 years old. Izuku didn't move. He stood his ground, his posture perfectly straight. Because of his intense physical conditioning over the last 10 months, he was now an inch taller than Bakugo. The realization seemed to hit the explosive blonde like a physical blow. "Kaken," Izuku said, his voice even and calm. There was no tremor. No fear. Bakugo's eyes narrowed, a muscle ticking in his jaw. He looked Izuku up and down, taking in the broad shoulders, the thick neck, and the quiet, unnerving confidence radiating from the boy he had always deemed a pebble on the side of the road. "What the hell are you looking so smug for, you quirkless freak?" Bakugo hissed, small sparks popping off his palms inside his pockets. "Did you actually think cleaning a garbage dump was going to make you hero material? You're going to die in there today." Izuku looked at the sparks, then back up to Bakugo's eyes. In his mind's eye, he didn't see Bakugo as an insurmountable bully anymore. He saw a boy with an explosive quirk. A quirk that, compared to the raw, atomic devastation of the A-bomb form, felt incredibly small. "I guess we'll see, Kaken," Izuku replied simply. He gave a polite nod, turned on his heel, and continued walking toward the entrance. Bakugo stood frozen on the pavement, his mouth slightly ajar. Fury, hot, blinding, and laced with a sudden, inexplicable sliver of doubt, bubbled in his chest. "Since when does he look at me like that?" Bakugo thought, his hands clenching into fists. "Like I'm not even a threat?" As Izuku walked, his mind was so occupied with calculating his caloric burn rate that he failed to notice his foot catching the edge of an uneven paving stone. His calm, cool exterior shattered as gravity took hold. "Ah, crap!" he panicked, throwing his arms out to brace for the concrete. Before his face could smash into the walkway, the sensation of gravity simply vanished. He floated, suspended in midair, his legs kicking comically. "Are you okay?" a bright, cheerful voice asked. Izuku was gently rotated and placed back on his feet. He turned to see a girl with a round, pleasant face, rosy cheeks, and short brown hair. She had her hands pressed together, her fingertips sporting small, pink pads. "I stopped you with my quirk," she said, smiling warmly. "I'm sorry I didn't ask first, but I figured you wouldn't mind not breaking your nose before the exam." Izuku's face flushed a brilliant shade of crimson. All his newfound confidence evaporated in the face of a cute girl actually speaking to him. Why yes. Thank you? I mean, I'm fine. Thank you for the save," she giggled at his flustered reaction. "I'm Ochiko Uraraka." "I'm super nervous, are you?" "Izuku Midoriya." He bowed rigidly. "And why yeah, a little bit." "Well, let's both do our best, Midoriya." Uraraka cheered, pumping a fist in the air before jogging off toward the auditorium. Izuku watched her go, a goofy, love-struck smile plastered on his face. "I talked to a girl," he cheered internally. Then, his analytical mind caught up. Zero-gravity quirk. Application of tactile telekinesis that nullifies the gravitational pull on objects. Incredibly useful for rescue operations and debris management. He shook his head, slapping his cheeks to focus. It was time for the written exam. The auditorium was massive, filled with thousands of hopeful applicants. Izuku sat in the middle row, his pencil flying across the page of the written test. The questions were difficult, covering advanced physics, hero law, applied mathematics, and crisis management. But to Izuku, who had spent his entire life analyzing the geometry of hero fights and the legal ramifications of quirk usage, it felt like a review sheet. He finished with 30 minutes to spare. Shortly after, the lights dimmed, and the voice hero, Present Mike, exploded onto the stage with a booming, theatrical entrance. "Welcome to today's live performance. Everybody say hey." Present Mike roared, leaning over the podium. Silence met him. Izuku winced at the awkwardness, but focused entirely on the massive screen behind the pro hero. Present Mike explained the practical exam. A 10-minute urban combat simulation where students would earn points by destroying robotic villains categorized by difficulty. 1, 2, and 3-point targets. Robots, Izuku thought, a massive grin spreading across his face. Perfect. I don't have to hold back. I can unleash the full kinetic output without worrying about killing anyone. Suddenly, a tall, broad-shouldered boy with glasses and meticulously parted blue hair stood up, his hands slicing through the air with robotic precision. "Excuse me, sir. I have a question," the boy shouted. He pointed a rigid finger at the screen. "On the printout, there are 4 types of villains, not 3. If this is a misprint, then UA, the most prominent school in Japan, should be ashamed of that foolish mistake." The boy then turned, his intense gaze locking directly onto Izuku. "In addition, you over there with the unkempt hair." Izuku blinked, pointing at himself. You've been muttering under your breath this entire time. The bespectacled boy scolded. It's distracting. If you are here on a pleasure trip, then you should leave immediately. Several students snickered. Bakugo, sitting a few rows ahead, sneered. Izuku didn't shrink into his seat. Instead, he stood up. I apologize if my muttering distracted you, Izuku said loudly, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium. I was calculating the structural weak points of the robots displayed on the screen based on their tread patterns and arm joints. But you're right, I should keep my analysis to myself during the orientation. I'm sorry. He bowed politely and sat back down. The bespectacled boy, Tenya Ida, faltered. He had expected a rebellious slacker, not a polite, hyper-analytical apology. I see. Very well, carry on. He coughed, sitting down stiffly. President Mike chuckled, pointing a finger gun at Ida. Okay, examinee 7111. Thanks for the great message. The fourth villain type is worth 0 points. It's a massive obstacle. There's one in every battle center. An obstacle that will go crazy in narrow spaces. It's not impossible to defeat, but there's no reason to try. I recommend you listeners try to avoid it. A 0-point obstacle, Izuku noted mentally. A hazard meant to test spatial awareness and threat avoidance under pressure. That's all from me. President Mike shouted. Plus ultra. Now go prepare for your battle centers. Izuku was assigned to Battle Center B. He stood near the back of the massive crowd of applicants gathered before a set of towering, 100-foot-tall metal gates. The mock city behind the gates was visible, a sprawling, meticulously constructed metropolis of concrete, glass, and asphalt. He looked around. He recognized the boy with glasses, Ida, stretching intensely near the front. He saw Uraraka, taking deep breaths, looking pale and nervous. Izuku himself was dressed in a cheap, loose-fitting gray tracksuit. He knew it was going to be completely destroyed in a matter of seconds, but he couldn't exactly strip down to his underwear in front of everyone. He had brought 3 spare changes of clothes in his duffel bag for the aftermath. He closed his eyes. It was time. He didn't need a falling shipping container anymore. He had isolated the feeling. He visualized the green, sloshing liquid of the gamma core. He visualized the terrified eyes of the little boy in the alleyway. He visualized the sheer, crushing weight of the world, and the heat of the radiation burning through his veins. Trigger, Izuku commanded his nervous system. He inhaled sharply. His heart rate immediately spiked, leaping from a resting 60 beats per minute to an explosive 180 beats per minute. Right, let's start. President Mick's voice suddenly boomed over the loudspeakers. Get moving! There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, run, run! The massive gates began to swing open. The other students hesitated, confused by the lack of a formal countdown, but Izuku didn't hesitate. As the gates parted, a blinding, localized flash of vibrating emerald light erupted from the back of the crowd. Several students shielded their eyes, crying out in alarm. Ryip! The sound of fabric tearing violently echoed over the chatter. The air pressure around Izuku shifted as his mass exponentially increased in a fraction of a second. The heat of the gamma radiation washed over the students standing near him, smelling sharply of ozone. When the green light faded a second later, the boy with the unkempt green hair was gone. Standing in his place was a nightmare. Towering at 3.5 meters tall, a massive, heavily armored behemoth cast a long, terrifying shadow over the applicants. Deep-sea blue plates of biological armor, thick as bank vault doors, covered a physique of impossible, hulking muscle. Jagged, obsidian claws rested at the end of hands the size of manhole covers. The beast had no pupils, only a solid, glowing golden light where its eyes should be. Uraraka screamed, stumbling backward. Ida froze in sheer terror, his engine sputtering out as he gazed up at the monster. What the hell is that? A random student shrieked. Is that the 0-pointer? The blue behemoth didn't look at them. It lowered its massive, armored head, steam hissing from its heavy, jutting jaw. The creature's legs bunched, the concrete beneath its massive, clawed feet spider-webbing instantly from the sheer pressure. Boom! With a concussive shockwave that knocked several nearby students off their feet, the beast launched itself forward. It didn't run. It bounded, clearing the heads of the paralyzed examinees and soaring through the open gates like a blue cannonball. It landed 50 yards inside the mock city, shattering the asphalt into a massive crater, before exploding forward again, disappearing around a corner in a blur of terrifying speed and power. Back at the gates, the examinees were utterly stunned into silence. "What are you waiting for?" President Mick's voice bellowed, breaking the spell. "That listener is already racking up points." "Go, go, go!" Panic set in, and the crowd surged forward into the city, terrified that the blue monster was going to leave nothing left. High above the battle centers, hidden within a darkened observation room, the teachers of UA high schools sat before a massive bank of monitors. "We have quite a crop this year," the heroine Midnight purred, crossing her legs as she watched a monitor showing a blonde boy creating explosions. "That Bakugo kid is ferocious." Indeed, the principal, Nizu, a small, highly intelligent chimera resembling a bear-slash-mouse hybrid, nodded from his elevated chair. "Excellent quirks across the board. But I believe we have an anomaly in Center B." All eyes turned to the central screen. The camera tracked the blue behemoth moving through the city. "Good Lord," the pro-hero ectoplasm murmured. "Is that a student? I thought it was a villain infiltrating the grounds." Applicant 7112. Izuku Midoriya, Nizu read from a file, a very curious smile spreading across his snout. Registered as quirkless for 14 years. He updated his registry application to heteromorphic mutation just 2 weeks ago. Heteromorphic? Vlad King scoffed. "He's a giant blue tank. That's a textbook transformation quirk." He went from a normal kid to a 3-meter beast in less than a second. Sitting in the darkest corner of the room, completely bound in yellow sleeping bag material, Shota Aizawa stared at the screen with bloodshot, narrowed eyes. "Power loader," Aizawa rasped, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Look at the energy sensors in Center B." The support course teacher, Power loader, typed rapidly on his console. His eyes widened behind his large, metallic helmet. "What the?" Principal Nizu, Aizawa is right. The sensors aren't picking up a normal quirk factor emission from Midoriya. "Explain," Nizu requested. "When a quirk is activated, especially a transformation or emitter type, it gives off a distinct biological wave pattern," Power Loader said, bringing up a complex graph next to the video feed. "Midoriya's signature is completely blank on the quirk spectrum. But the Geiger counters in Center B are going crazy. He's radiating energy. It's gamma radiation." The room fell dead silent. Even the skeletal form of All Might, standing near the back of the room, gripped the railing tightly, his sunken blue eyes glued to the screen. "Young Midoriya?" he thought, utterly bewildered. "The quirkless boy from the roof? What happened to you? Is he a danger to the other students?" Midnight asked, her voice laced with concern. "If he's radioactive." "No," Power Loader quickly clarified. "It's entirely localized. The radiation is contained within his cellular structure, completely absorbed by his own mass. It only flashes ambiently during the transformation sequence, and it dissipates instantly. But still, this isn't a natural quirk. I've never seen biology operate like this." "Let's see how the anomaly fights," Nizu said, pressing a button to expand the feed on Midoriya. On the screen, Izuku was currently surrounded by 3 2-point robots and 1 3-point robot. "He's surrounded," Vlad King noted. "Let's see if the brute force matches the size." But Izuku didn't roar and charge. Instead, the teachers watched in stunned silence as the behemoth took a step backward toward a tall, red brick building. As his massive blue shoulders brushed against the brick, a wave of color violently rippled across his body. The deep-sea blue dissolved into rust red, crossed with horizontal lines of white mortar. In less than 2 seconds, the 3-meter-tall monster had completely vanished, perfectly blending into the wall behind him. "Active camouflage?" Snipe exclaimed, nearly dropping his hat. "A beast that size has active chromatic adaptation?" On the screen, the robots scanned the empty street, confused by the sudden disappearance of their target. They turned their visual sensors away from the brick wall. That was their mistake. A section of the brick wall suddenly detached. A massive, brick-patterned arm shot out, grasping the 3-pointer by its mechanical head. With a casual flick of its wrist, the camouflaged beast tore the robot's head off, a shower of sparks and oil spraying across the street. The color instantly shifted back to blue as Izuku broke his concentration to exert maximum kinetic force. He didn't drop the robot's head. He spun around, using his immense torque, and hurled the severed metal head like a major league fastball. It struck one of the 2 pointers square in the chassis, the sheer kinetic impact shattering the robot into a dozen pieces. Before the remaining 2 robots could fire their rubber bullets, Izuku leaped into the air, completely clearing their firing arc. He landed behind them, grabbed the back of their treads, and violently smashed the 2 machines together, crushing them into a compressed cube of scrap metal. 10 points in under 5 seconds. He's not just a brawler, Aizawa noted, a rare hint of approval in his tired voice. He understands his size makes him a target. He used the camouflage to eliminate the most dangerous threat first, then used the environment and the enemy's own chassis as a projectile. He's fighting with his brain, not his muscles. Fascinating, Nisa practically vibrated with excitement. A tactical genius trapped in the body of a behemoth. But how does he handle saving others? Nisa reached out and flipped open a secure glass panel on his console. Beneath it was a large red button. Let's test their true metal, Nisa smiled, and slammed his paw down. Down in Battle Center B, Izuku was having the time of his life. He was currently at 65 points. The A-bomb form felt incredible. He wasn't holding back. For the first time in his life, he didn't have to be careful. He could let the beast off the leash, so long as he aimed it at the metal villains. He had just punched a 3-pointer so hard it flew through a concrete wall when the ground beneath his massive, clawed feet began to vibrate. It wasn't a small tremor. It felt like a localized earthquake. Izuku turned his heavy, armored head toward the center of the city. A deafening, mechanical roar echoed through the streets, followed by the sound of glass shattering across entire city blocks. Rising from behind the buildings, blotting out the sun, was a colossal machine. It was easily the size of a skyscraper, rolling forward on treads the size of apartment buildings. Its single, massive red eye glowed with menacing intent. The 0-pointer, Izuku rumbled, his voice echoing off the buildings. Screams erupted from the other examinees. The sheer scale of the machine triggered absolute panic. Run away! Someone shouted. It's huge! We have to get out of here. Izuku watched as dozens of students sprinted past him, fleeing in the opposite direction. His analytical mind quickly assessed the situation. No points. Massive risk. President Mike advised avoiding it. The logical move is to retreat and look for any remaining 1 or 2 pointers. He turned to run. But as he pivoted his massive frame, his enhanced, golden eyes caught a flash of movement in the dust and debris near the base of the 0-pointer. It was the girl. Uraraka. She was pinned underneath a massive slab of concrete that had fallen from a crumbling building. She was struggling frantically, her face pale, desperately trying to push the rock off her leg. But she was exhausted, likely suffering from quirk overuse. She couldn't float it. The 0-pointer rolled forward, completely oblivious to the girl trapped in its path. Its massive, building-sized foot raised high into the air, preparing to crush the street, and her, into dust. Izuku didn't think. The same instinct that had driven him into the alleyway to save the little boy took over. He didn't care about the exam. He didn't care about points. He roared. It was a sound that shook the very foundations of the mock city. The guttural, terrifying roar of an apex predator challenging a god. Izuku's massive, piston-like legs coiled. He didn't use camouflage. He didn't try to hide. He channeled every ounce of gamma-radiated kinetic energy into his calves and launched himself forward. The concrete street exploded behind him, leaving a crater 30 feet wide. He soared over the heads of the fleeing students, a massive blue blur, and landed directly in front of Uraraka. Uraraka looked up, her eyes wide with terror, not just at the giant robot, but at the 3-meter-tall blue monster that had suddenly appeared between her and death. Izuku didn't look back at her. He planted his massive feet, spreading his stance wide, digging his obsidian claws deep into the asphalt to anchor himself. The 0-pointer's foot, a solid block of steel weighing hundreds of tons, descended. Izuku looked up. He raised his arms, his massive blue hands open, his thick, heavily armored shoulders bunching tightly. I am a wall, Izuku thought, his adrenaline skyrocketing, pushing his mutation to its absolute, red line limit. The gamma energy flared, his blue armor glowing faintly green at the seams. I will not break. Smash! The foot struck Izuku. The shockwave of the impact blew out the windows of every building within a 2-block radius. A massive cloud of dust and debris erupted, obscuring the street entirely. In the observation room, All Might leaped out of his chair. He'll be crushed. Wait! Aizawa yelled, leaning closer to the monitor. Look at the dust. Down in the street, the dust began to settle. Uraraka coughed, opening her eyes. She hadn't been crushed. Standing over her, his knees bent deeply, his massive arms raised above his head, was the blue behemoth. Izuku had caught the foot. The sheer weight of the 0-pointer was astronomical. Izuku's boots had sunken 3 feet into the solid concrete street from the pressure. His blue muscles bulged, veins thick as garden hoses straining against his armor plates. The mechanical joints of the 0-pointer groaned and shrieked, its downward momentum completely halted by the living tank beneath it. GGGGGH. Izuku grunted, the sound vibrating the air around them. The 0-pointer, confused by the resistance, attempted to apply more pressure, its engines roaring. Izuku felt the strain. His human bones, buried deep beneath the armor, ached. But he remembered his training. He remembered his analysis. Don't fight the weight. Redirect it. Leverage. Izuku shifted his grip. His massive, clawed hands locked onto the heavy hydraulic struts connecting the robot's foot to its ankle joint. Hiya! Izuku Midoriya unleashed a roar that sounded like a jet engine. He didn't just push the foot up. He pulled it forward, toward himself, while simultaneously driving his massive legs upward. He used the 0-pointer's own forward momentum against it, applying a flawless judo throw maneuver amplified by the strength of a half-ton, gamma-radiated beast. The physics of the maneuver defied reality. The kinetic energy Izuku generated erupted from his muscles. The 0-pointer's foot was suddenly ripped upward and forward. The skyscraper-sized machine lost its center of gravity. It tilted backward, its arms flailing uselessly in the air, with a deafening, catastrophic crash that sent a tremor through the entirety of UA High School. The 0-pointer flipped entirely backward, slamming into the mock city behind it, and crushing 3 unoccupied buildings into powder. Silence fell over Battle Center B. The other students, who had stopped running to look back, were frozen like statues. They had just watched a blue monster catch a falling building and judo throw it. Izuku stood panting, his chest heaving violently. Steam poured off his blue armor plates, a byproduct of the intense heat generated by his kinetic exertion. He slowly turned around and looked down at Uraraka. She was staring up at him, her mouth open, utterly speechless. Izuku realized how terrifying he looked. The steam, the glowing golden eyes, the jagged claws. He needed to show her he wasn't a threat. He knelt down, careful not to crush the rubble entirely, and placed his massive hands on the concrete slab pinning her leg. He lifted it as easily as a pillow, tossing it aside. Then, incredibly gently, he extended a massive, 3-foot-wide hand toward her. Are you hurt? Izuku asked. His voice was a booming rumble, but he tried to modulate it, making it as soft as a beast of his size could manage. Uraraka looked at the giant hand, then up at the golden eyes. Despite his terrifying appearance, those eyes held a desperate, gentle concern. I think my ankle is sprained, she whispered. Time's up. President Nick's voice echoed across the city, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku sighed, a massive gust of wind escaping his jaws. The adrenaline immediately began to crash. The exam was over. He didn't need the armor anymore. He closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing. Right in front of Uraraka's bewildered eyes, the giant blue monster violently shivered. The thick armor plates seemed to melt, the massive musculature rapidly compressing inward. In a matter of seconds, the 3-meter beast vanished. Kneeling in front of her, gasping for air, sweating profusely, and looking utterly exhausted, was the green-haired boy who had tripped at the front gates. And Midoriya? Uraraka gasped. You're the blue guy? Izuku looked up at her, giving a weak, exhausted smile. Yeah. It's a lot to carry around. Suddenly, his stomach let out a monstrous, echoing growl that sounded almost exactly like his A-bomb roar. Izuku's face flushed bright red, his human embarrassment completely returning. And it takes a lot of calories, he stammered, frantically reaching into his shredded tracksuit pockets. He pulled out a slightly squished protein bar and ripped it open with his teeth. You don't happen to have any snacks, do you? Before Uraraka could answer, a small, elderly woman with a large syringe walking stick hobbled through the crowd of stunned students. All right, out of the way, recovery girl grumbled. She walked up to Uraraka and gave her ankle a quick kiss, the healing quirk instantly repairing the sprain. She then turned to Izuku. She looked him up and down, noting his shredded clothes and the extreme exhaustion radiating from him. You, she said, poking him in the chest with her cane. Are you injured? Broken bones? Ruptured muscles? Izuku swallowed his bite of protein bar. No, ma'am. I'm completely fine. Just, really hungry. Recovery girl's eyebrows shot up. She had watched the monitors. She had seen the kinetic force he exerted. To do that without a single broken bone meant his human baseline was incredibly resilient, or the mutation offered flawless protection. She reached into her pocket and handed him a handful of gummy bears. Eat up, Sonny. You've had a busy day. Back in the observation room, the teachers were in an uproar. He flipped it, Vlad King muttered, repeatedly replaying the footage. He didn't punch it. He grabbed the strut, found the fulcrum, and used the machine's own mass against it. That requires extreme spatial awareness and an instantaneous calculation of physics. And the rescue points, Midnight smiled softly. He didn't hesitate for a second. He threw himself between the girl and certain death. Nisa sat in his elevated chair, his paws steepled together, a gleam of absolute delight in his beady eyes. Gentlemen, ladies, Nisa said softly, silencing the room. For years we have seen quirks that are gifts. We have seen quirks that are curses. But this boy, Izuku Midoriya, he possesses something entirely different. He has captured a monster, and he is steering it with the mind of a true hero. All Might stared at the screen, looking at the exhausted, smiling face of the quirkless boy he had dismissed on that rooftop 10 months ago. I told you to be realistic, All Might thought, a profound sense of awe and shame washing over him. And you responded by defying reality itself. Young Midoriya. I was so incredibly wrong. I believe, Nisa concluded, that Yui is about to become very interesting.